This is Kirtop with you, and these are 100 artifacts with inscriptions that no one has been able to read. Music is playing. The Narmer Palette. The Narmer Palette was found in the temple complex of Hierakonpolis. This is a stone slab made of dark slate, about 64 centimeter tall, dating back to around 3100 before Christ. Formally, it's a cosmetic palette, but in reality, it's an item that was never used in everyday life. It's too large, too detailed, and too demonstrative. On one side, a man in Upper Egypt's white crown raises a mace over a captive. The ruler appears much larger than the others. The gesture is captured at the moment of the strike, with an attendant nearby, and in front of him, a completely subdued enemy. On the other side, there is also a man, this time in the red crown of Lower Egypt. He leads the procession and inspects the decapitated bodies of his enemies, laid out in strict order. Fantastical beasts with intertwined necks are at the center, shown here in their finished form. Narmer's name is rendered in signs and enclosed in a frame, one of the earliest instances of a ruler's name being recorded next to an image of power. The palette was placed in a temple, not in a burial. It is not accompanied by explanatory inscriptions and does not tell a story in words. Everything here is conveyed through poses, the scale of the figures, and the order of the scenes. Hunger stones lie in the hand of the Elbe River near the Czech town of Děčín, boulders with carved inscriptions. They appear only in years of severe drought, when the water level drops to critical marks. These stones are known as hunger stones, unique markers of climate disasters that have been used in Central Europe for centuries. Dates and short phrases are carved on the surface. Such marks recorded moments when the river became shallow, navigation stopped, and crop failure became inevitable for the riverside towns. This meant rising prices, supply disruptions, and hunger. The earliest dates on the stones go back to the early 15th century, and the latest to the end of the 19th. These are not symbols or decorations, but a practical memory of recurring crises. The stone remained in place, and new generations added their marks next to the previous ones, continuing the count. Similar objects are known in other regions of Europe as well. They record the connection between climate, the economy, and people's lives without interpretation or commentary. The stones remain silent most of the time and appear only when conditions become extreme. This is direct evidence of how nature entered history through the water level and the inscribed date. A vessel with opium. For many years, an unremarkable alabaster vessel from ancient Egypt stood in one of the Yale University Museum storerooms. No inscriptions, no decorations, nothing that would distinguish it from hundreds of similar items, until researchers decided to study the dark residue on its inner walls. Chemical analysis revealed traces of substances that are hard to explain by chance. In the remains, they found compounds characteristic of opium: morphine, noscapine, papaverine. This meant that the vessel was not used for incense or oils, as previously thought, and possibly not just on rare occasions, but regularly. The discovery about the opium vessel is not just the fact of opium use, but the scale of it. It seems that these vessels are found in burials, temples, and residential houses. They appear in different regions and eras. If at least some of them contained the same substances, then opium was not a rarity or a secret tool of priests, but a part of everyday life. Some researchers suggest that such vessels could accompany a person from birth to death, being used in rituals, medicine, and rites of passage. There is even a theory that similar alabaster vessels found in Tutankhamun's tomb originally also contained opium, but it is now impossible to verify this. The contents vanished long ago, leaving just traces on the walls. And the question that changes our perspective on ancient Egypt: who really were the people whose civilization we are used to considering a model of strict sacred order? The Sumerian planisphere. In the 19th century, archaeologists were sorting through the library of King Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, and among thousands of tablets, they found a strange round piece of clay with sector lines and cuneiform writing on it. Later, it turned out that they were looking at one of the oldest star maps created by the Sumerians about 5,500 years ago. The planisphere is small, but it's made carefully. It marks sections of the sky, the positions of celestial bodies, and notes about a rare bright object that was observed in that era. For the Sumerians, this was not an abstraction. Such tablets helped them calculate time, holidays, and agricultural cycles. People didn't look at the sky for romance. They needed to know when to expect romance, floods, storms, or the start of a season. And the most amazing thing is, this map is still readable today. Even after thousands of years, you can see how the ancient inhabitants of Mesopotamia tried to bring order to the night sky and make it understandable. This small object shows how early people began to systematically study the world around them. A secondary emperor. When Roman sources mention 27 before Christ, they call it the moment when the Republic ended. The Senate handed power over to Octavian. He took the title Augustus, and from that moment, Rome officially became an empire. This scene has been written dozens of times, and it always looks the same. A tired senator and a young ruler who supposedly doesn't want power, and a state that begs him to stay. But if you remove the embellished retelling and look at the documents from this period, a peculiarity arises that is usually not explained. In the decisive years, when Rome is essentially being rebuilt, almost all the real actions are not carried out by Augustus. I first noticed this while reviewing the list of positions Augustus assigned after the campaign. There are consuls, proconsuls, governors, military tribunes, but one name appears too often and always in practical matters: Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. He is appointed to command the fleet. He is sent to resolve crises. He is placed in the most unstable areas. This could be attributed to trust, if not for one detail. Almost no major decision of Augustus is carried out without him. The victory at Actium is formalized as Augustus's political achievement, but it was won by Agrippa. Control over Italy is maintained not through the Senate, but through a network of military commands, all managed by him as well. When Rome begins to experience water shortages, it is Agrippa who is given the authority to restore the aqueducts. When the port in Ostia needs rebuilding, he handles it. When a rebellion must be suppressed, sources say he is sent there. He acts as an executor, not an advisor. Reading the text in order, it seems Augustus rarely makes decisions himself. He himself approves, endorses, signs, but the real action happens through one person, and this starts to look less like friendship and more like a scheme. Such schemes don't last long in Rome. Assistants who become too powerful are usually removed, just like dozens before him, but Agrippa is not removed. Moreover, his authority keeps growing. In 18 before Christ, Augustus gives him his daughter Julia. This is a political move, but it's a strange one if you look closely. Agrippa is not from a noble family, not from the old elite, not someone who is usually integrated into the dynasty. He is a man of action, a military man, an administrator, an engineer, and yet he becomes part of the family. This means that Augustus not only trusts him, but also binds him to himself on a level where betrayal is impossible. And here comes the next question, which is rarely asked directly. If Agrippa is so important, why does he never become a symbol of power? You can try to find the answer in the titles. Augustus gathers everything related to the image for himself. Pontiff, tribune, defender of the republic, father of the fatherland. Agrippa gets something different. He receives imperium, the right to act. His power is not symbolic, but functional. And the more you look at this distribution of roles, the clearer it becomes that this is not a temporary solution, but a stable structure. One holds the public sphere, the other holds the system. This becomes especially clear at the moment when Agrippa dies in 12 before Christ. After his death, Augustus doesn't just lose an assistant. A series of decisions begins that seem strange, ineffective, and belated. Rebellions are suppressed more slowly. Provinces slip out of control. Succession crises become more acute. Augustus remains the same, but the mechanism starts to fail, and this is visible even in small things. Construction slows down. Administrative reforms stall. The army begins to act less cohesively. Yes, this isn't a collapse, but it's a loss of precision. And here an unpleasant feeling arises, one that's hard to ignore. If a person without the title of emperor was so important that after his death, the system began to gradually fall apart, then something fundamentally important has been omitted from the official history. And if this happened in Rome, the most documented civilization of antiquity, then the question becomes broader. Is this an isolated case or a recurring pattern? And if it's a pattern, how many times have we already seen it without realizing what we're seeing? It is from this moment that the story of Augustus stops being the story of one person and begins to look like the first recorded example of a different power structure. A structure where the figure and the mechanism are separated, where memory preserves one thing, but governance relies on another. And if this model didn't appear by chance, it means it will repeat somewhere. The only question is where. A shield from the Thames? In 2019, during construction work on the banks of the Thames in London, an object was found that instantly made headlines. It was a shield, not bronze, not iron, but made of wood, about 2,400 years old, and that was a surprise. It was believed that wooden shields simply couldn't survive for so long, especially in river sediments. The shield turned out to be made of willow planks, held together with leather, and a thin layer of painted limestone. The surface is decorated with red and black patterns, concentric circles typical of Celtic art, with a convex boss in the center, the core of which protected the hand. Visible repairs include staple marks, patches, and resin drips on the wood, suggesting the item was made for combat, not decoration. For archaeologists, the find was a revelation. Until then, it was believed that Iron Age warriors in Britain used only bronze or metal shields. Wooden ones were mentioned in sources, but there was no direct evidence. Now they have been found and in excellent condition. The researcher notes that the shield's design was ingeniously thought out. Light, strong, and flexible, it was perfectly suited for close combat. Laboratory tests showed that it could withstand strong blows, and its shape helped absorb the energy. The first prayer of Europe. Archaeologists in Germany reported a discovery that changed the understanding of the spread of Christianity in Europe. In 2018, during excavations of an ancient Roman cemetery in a suburb of Frankfurt, at the site of the former city of Nida, a small silver amulet was discovered. It was found near the chin of a man buried between 230 and 270 AD, and apparently was hung around his neck as a personal talisman. The amulet was a thin strip of silvery foil, only 3.5 centimeters long, on which a text had been engraved during the owner's lifetime. The scientists couldn't read the inscription. The metal was too fragile, and the scroll was too tightly rolled. Only in 2024, with the help of computer tomography and three-dimensional modeling, were researchers at the Mainz Institute of Archaeology able to reconstruct 18 lines of Latin text. It contains phrases such as "Holy, holy, holy, in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and before Christ every knee bows, in heaven, on earth, and under the earth." These words, typical of Christian liturgy, hadn't been found in artifacts from such an early period before. The inscription mentions Saint Titus, a disciple of the Apostle Paul, which makes the amulet one of the earliest pieces of evidence of Christian tradition outside of Italy. This is the oldest confirmed Christian text found north of the Alps, the El Toro artifacts known as El Toro. There are hundreds of stone and bone objects circulating online, books made of slabs with embossed covers, masks, figurines with almond-shaped eyes, and tablets with unknown writing. They are allegedly found on the hills of El Toro in Mexico. The total number of items is said to be several thousand, or even up to 20,000. Some of the artifacts are indeed made skillfully, with neat carvings and recurring motifs. On the other hand, there are no published excavation reports with coordinates, stratigraphy, associated ceramics, and laboratory datings that would allow us to distinguish genuine antiquities from modern forgeries. Artifacts from El Toro are often placed alongside the Ica stones from Peru, also a mass collection, also featuring themes of out-of-place knowledge, and also surrounded by controversy, just like El Toro. There are expedition reports from enthusiasts and even mentions of laboratory tests, but it never gets to verifiable publications in specialized journals or official museum attribution. As long as there are no proper reports and datings, it's just a large pile of privately owned items, beautiful, varied in size, but unsuitable as a source for ancient history. And one more important clarification: do not confuse the Mexican El Toro with the Spanish cave Cueva del Toro. The Spanish site is a classic archaeology location. Layer, context, datings, publications, including studies on bone, double-edged tools, and Neolithic economy. This is exactly what an evidence base looks like, and this is precisely what the Mexican El Toro lacks. The Sumerian myth about the trickster. In the storage rooms of the British Museum, there was an unremarkable clay tablet, NI, 12,501 from the city of Nishur, modern-day Iraq, about 4,400 years old, from early dynastic Sumer. Recently, about the series, Jan Matuszaki deciphered the text and the drawing, which were visible only under oblique light. This is a fragment of a myth, where the main characters are the god lord Endel, his son, the storm god Ishkur, and the fox messenger. According to the plot, Ishkur ends up in the underworld. On earth, the rain disappears, the harvest withers. Endel calls a gathering of the gods, but no one wants to go down for the captive. The fox volunteers, a small but agile creature. In the drawing, he moves forward with his paws tied. This is a convention showing his willingness to take risks. The story continues on another tablet. The tablet has not yet been found, but the surviving lines describe how the fox deceives the lords of the underworld, pretends to drink their wine, but actually hides in a jug, distracts the guards, and leads Ishkur out into the light. The story is one of the oldest examples of a trickster hero who succeeds with cunning where strength is powerless. The tablet is important in two ways. It records the connection between climate fears and weather gods, and it shows that the image of the cunning fox already served as a lesson about the power of intelligence. Human footprints in a coffin. In Roman Britain, archaeologists discovered burials that immediately stand out from the usual picture. About 1,800 years ago, the bodies of the deceased here were covered with a thick gypsum-like mixture, pouring it directly into stone and lead sarcophagi. The material would harden, repeating the contours of the body, almost like the casts in Pompeii. But that wasn't the main thing. During the clearing of one of these sarcophagi, researchers noticed clear fingerprints left on the surface of the gypsum. The traces of a hand, which mixed and pressed the mixture by hand, were preserved inside the coffin and remained hidden until the layer began to be scanned in 3D. This is a rare case when archaeologists record not just a ritual, but the direct physical action of a specific person. Previously, it was believed that the gypsum was poured in a very hot state, but the prints showed that the material was soft and pliable. This means it was applied slowly, touching the body and the walls of the coffin. The traces are located along the inner edges, as if someone was carefully smoothing the surface. Researchers hope to find out who this hand belonged to. There is a chance that traces of DNA have been preserved in the gypsum, but the likelihood is low. So far, only one thing is clear. This method of burial required close and prolonged contact between the living and the dead. Power before the pharaoh. When I started looking to see if the Roman pattern was repeated in other civilizations, I deliberately went to places where power always seemed as sacred as possible. Egypt. If anywhere the face and the mechanism had to coincide, it was there, where the pharaoh was considered a god. But it was Egypt that turned out to be the most troubling confirmation that what we saw in Rome was not an exception, but the rule. The official history of Thutmose III looks impeccable. He is called Egypt's greatest military leader, a conqueror who expanded the state's borders farther than anyone before him. He ruled for more than 50 years, won dozens of campaigns, and created an empire. But if you look not at the end, but at the beginning of his reign, a gap appears, which is usually explained in a single line and then quickly passed over. For the first 20 years, he does not rule. Formally, he is the pharaoh, but real power is in the hands of Hatshepsut. This is not a disputed version. It is recorded on the walls of temples, in titulature, in inscriptions. In official depictions, Hatshepsut bears full royal titles, is portrayed in male form, performs rituals, oversees construction, and controls the economy and trade. Thutmose exists at this time like a shadow, as a figure who cannot be removed but also cannot be allowed to govern. He is present in the reliefs, but not in the decisions. This situation is often explained as a temporary anomaly, but if you look more closely, it appears to be a stable structure. Hatshepsut is not just a regent, she governs the system, temples are built under her, trade develops with Punt, the administration is strengthened, and Egypt is stable. Thutmose is learning military affairs at this time, but he doesn't make any decisions. And most importantly, he doesn't break anything. He waits. When Hatshepsut dies, something happens that Egyptologists couldn't understand for a long time. Several years after her death, a systematic destruction of her name begins. Reliefs are knocked off, cartouches are cut out, statues are smashed, and images are defaced. This is not a spontaneous act of revenge or an outburst of rage. It's a careful, prolonged effort that lasted for decades. It begins only after Thutmose has taken control of the system, not immediately. And here the same question arises as in Rome. If Hatshepsut was a usurper, why wasn't she destroyed immediately? Why does his greatness begin only after the person who held him back disappears? When you start looking at Thutmose III's campaigns in chronological order, it becomes clear that they take place only after Egypt is completely stabilized. He doesn't build an empire from scratch. He uses an already established administrative machine. The economy is functioning, supply lines are established, officials are trained, temples are provided with resources, and logistics are organized. This allows him to conduct continuous military campaigns, but none of this is his own work. It's an inheritance. And the more you look at Thutmose's actions after the death of Hatshepsut, the clearer it becomes that he's not just making conquests, he's rewriting memory, erasing from history the figure without whom his own greatness would have no foundation. This is not just erasing a name, it's replacing a mechanism with a face. Egypt must remember a single pharaoh, not a system in which real power belonged to someone else. Here the pattern repeats almost perfectly. One person holds the power, another becomes the symbol. The first disappears from memory. The second remains in legend. But there's an important difference from Rome. In Egypt, the process of erasure is physically visible. You can touch it, it's carved in stone. It's a trace of how history cleans the display and removes the mechanism. And it's at this moment that it becomes clear the Roman case is neither unique nor accidental. It's just better documented. Egypt shows that this pattern is older, deeper, and perhaps more fundamental than we are used to thinking. If even in a civilization where the ruler was a god, power could be divided between the individual and the system, then this is not a feature unique to Rome. This is a basic structure of power that repeats itself regardless of culture, religion, or era. After Egypt, it was already difficult for me to see Augustus as an exception. Too many things coincided, and then I realized that from now on, I needed to look not for similar biographies, but for similar consequences. Because if this pattern is real, then there must be moments in history when the mechanism disappears, but the figure remains, and then the system begins to collapse. And such moments do exist. They just aren't connected to each other. Ant Skull, Catamarca, Argentina. Builders were digging a trench for a water pipe and came across a row of burial urns. In one of them, they discovered a human skull of a very strange shape, which the local press called the head of an ant-man. The shape indeed is hard to consider ordinary. The forehead juts forward, the crown stretches back, and the skull looks squeezed in a vice. People naturally first thought of aliens and genetics. But archaeologists quickly calmed things down. Between the 3rd and 12th centuries, the Ciénaga and Aguada cultures lived in these lands, and they practiced artificial cranial deformation. They simply wrapped the baby's head with cloth and fixed it between wooden boards. The soft bones gradually changed shape. Of course, you might ask why. It's simple. Beauty, belonging to a group, social status, just like today with tattoos or body modifications. It's worth noting that there's almost no evidence of harm to health from such practices. A child's skull is flexible, and the brain grows to fill the available space, so most deformed skulls show no signs of trauma or developmental delay. There is also an alternative explanation: hydrocephalus, a buildup of fluid. This was pointed out by Heidi Dawson-Hobbes. But then we would expect other changes: thinned bones, asymmetry. Such a skull is a good example of why we shouldn't immediately classify such finds as anomalies of history. Sometimes a strange shape is not a message from aliens, but a very human desire to look like your own kind. A manuscript surprise. Imagine opening a medieval tome, expecting dusty prayers, and instead you get a full-blown attraction. Some pages flare up with huge initials, others are covered in Turonian notes. The old art of shorthand, which today only a couple dozen specialists can decipher. Across the whole planet, you come across a spread where the letters form the shapes of constellations, as if the author decided to combine a school primer with the night sky. You turn the page, and in the corner you see a tiny scribble. The scribe quickly tested his pen, composing a mini medley of poems about birds. Half the space is taken up by wide margins. Why waste expensive parchment? It turns out the emptiness here is not really empty. It was on these margins that medieval students filled in marginalia, and later those same margins saved books from mold. The humid air would start to damage the edges of the book while the text remained untouched. There's also a completely unexpected format, the bat book. Such an almanac was carried hanging from the belt upside down, unfolded to its full length, and immediately provided a calendar, tables of lunar phases, and a list of saints for the whole year. The purple spots in the corners are mold scars. The manuscript was stored in damp conditions, allowing microbes to eat away at the pages. Now, scientists literally count the fungal growth rings, like on an old tree. Just imagine how much information is hidden in these cosmetic defects. They use them to date relocations, libraries, and even revise our understanding of that era's climate. These visual Easter eggs make the manuscript more than just text. It's a full-fledged quest. Every mark, every unexpected insert is a direct portal to the people who wrote, read, and used this book centuries before us. A letter delivered by miracle. In Australia, a family was simply cleaning up trash on the beach at Orton Beach when Debbie Brown's daughter noticed a bottle in the sand. An ordinary find for the coast until they saw folded sheets of paper inside. The letters turned out to be signed by two World War I soldiers, Malcolm Alexander Neville and William Kirk Harley, dated 1916. From the text, it was clear that Neville was from Wilkewada in South Australia. Brown found his relatives through Facebook, and his grandnephew, Jerby Neville, responded. It turned out that Malcolm was 28, and just a few months after he threw that bottle into the Great Australian Bight, he died. In France, the family had heard stories about him, and 100 years later, they unexpectedly received a letter from the beach. The relatives of the second soldier, Harley, were also contacted. His granddaughter says the family is still in shock, as if their grandfather reminded them of his presence from the past. For them, this bottle is not just an artifact, but a direct connection with a person who had always been almost a legend to them. Oceanographer Sharita Patiarachi suggests that the bottle itself floated for only a short time, several weeks or a month, before it washed up on Wharton Beach. Most likely it was quickly covered by sand, and for the rest of the time it simply lay under a layer of soil, waiting to be dug up again. The mystery of Abu Qir Bay, off the coast of Alexandria. Archaeologists have recovered artifacts from the bottom from an ancient city that lay underwater for more than 2,000 years. Excavations were carried out in Abu Qir Bay, the place where Canopus, a major port of the Ptolemaic era, once stood. Here they found fragments of temple columns, the head of a sphinx, a statue of a priest, and a massive headless granite torso. The work was carried out under the supervision of the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities and divers using equipment for archaeological dives. According to archaeologists, the city of Canop went underwater as a result of a series of earthquakes and tidal shifts that collapsed the Nile Delta. After it submerged, a layer of silt and sand covered the streets, temples, and necropolises. The artifacts discovered date back to the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, approximately from the 3rd century before Christ to the 3rd century AD. This is confirmed by the style of the images and the types of stone used. According to a statement by the Minister of Tourism and Antiquities, Sheriff Fadki, all the items found are being restored and will become part of the exhibition, Secrets of the Sunken City, at the National Museum of Alexandria. The exhibition already features 86 rare exhibits showing what life was like on the Egyptian coast back when the sea had not yet claimed this city. Ruling without a crown? When Napoleon came to power, there was no longer a state in France. There were debts, ruined institutions, and an army that existed on its own. Textbooks call this the chaos of the revolution, but documents show a different picture. The system of governance wasn't destroyed, it simply stopped working. And it was at this moment that a man appeared next to Napoleon, a man who did not command armies, did not win battles, and was almost never near the battlefield. His name is Charles-Maurice de Talleyrand. In 1799, just a few weeks before the coup of the 18th, Brumaire Talleyrand returns from disgrace and becomes the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Formally, the diplomat is actually the only person who negotiates with all sides at the same time. While Napoleon is taking power, Talleyrand negotiates with those who recognize this power. He holds back ambassadors, freezes decisions, promises guarantees that no one but him controls, and all information passes through him. That's why, after the coup, France is recognized almost immediately, even though it should have logically faced a blockade. in the years after. The pattern repeats. Napoleon wages wars, and Talleyrand handles their aftermath. He signs treaties, changes the wording, and leaves loopholes that allow France to come out of defeats with minimal losses. This can be seen in Tilsit, in Pressburg, in Luneville. Napoleon wins battles, but the state survives not because of the victories, but because of how their outcomes are formalized. And every time it's done by one man. The most important moment comes after 1812 when Napoleon essentially loses the war. At that moment, the system should have collapsed, but it doesn't, because Talleyrand doesn't leave with Napoleon. He stays. Moreover, he even starts negotiations against him. It looks like betrayal, but if you look at the documents, it appears to be the preservation of the mechanism. He negotiates with the victors so that France is not destroyed, so that it is not divided, so that it remains a state, and he succeeds in this. In 1815, after Waterloo, France remains a great power. This cannot be explained by military logic. It can only be explained administratively. After Napoleon's fall, Talleyrand becomes part of the new regime, then the next one, and then another one. Flags change, emperors and kings change, but he remains because he is a symbol, he is a function, and as long as he exists, the system works. When he dies, France enters a decade of instability, regime changes, revolutions, and crises. It's no longer an instant collapse, but the disappearance of the mechanism is felt immediately. This section is important not because of Napoleon, but because it shows the next phase of the scheme. In Rome and Egypt, the mechanism dies with the person, but in Europe, the mechanism outlives the individual, and this changes everything. It means the system evolves, and these people are not just random assistants. It means it learned long ago to separate itself from those who represent it. The Tarkhan dress at first glance is just a piece of faded linen, but radiocarbon dating immediately reveals a sensation. The garment is over 5,000 years old, predating the pyramids of Giza. It was found back in 1913 among a pile of burial textiles near the village of Tarkhan, and only modern restoration revealed its details. What we have before us is not a burial dummy, but an item from a real wardrobe. A V-shaped neckline, fine pleats on the bodice, sleeves down to the elbow, dark stripes of salt and fat along the underarm seams, and grains of Nile sand hiding in the microcracks of the fibers. All these are signs of wear. The dress was worn until the end, then placed in the tomb as a favorite garment so its owner could appear before the gods in what showed her status in life. The hand-woven linen uses tightly spun right twist threads with dense weaving and thousands of precise stitches just on the sleeves. The hem edges are neatly darned with a slightly different shade of thread. The ancient seamstress repaired the dress, unwilling to part with her precious work. This is a rare artifact that immerses us in the everyday life of early Egyptians. We are used to seeing them in gold and stone, but this tunic shows a much more down-to-earth luxury, the skill of creating comfortable and beautiful clothing. Long before the invention of the Silk Road and trading looms, there was the hidden relief of Nineveh, the northern palace. During the excavation, the floor was removed, and beneath it was a layer of dense clay, and under the clay, a huge stone slab measuring 6 by 3 meters and weighing about 12 tons. A ceremonial scene is carved on it. King Ashurbanipal stands between the patron god Ashur and the warlike Ishtar, with a fishman and a scorpion man at the edges, mythical beings marking the boundaries between the world of humans and the gods. The clothing patterns, arrow feathers, and lion claws are all so clear, it looks like the work was finished yesterday. Another relief was handled unusually. They carefully removed it from the wall, laid it face down, and covered it with ceramics on top. It seems this was done a couple of centuries after the fall of Assyria during the Hellenistic period. Why would someone hide such a thing? Currently, there are 2 versions. One says temple servants saved the relic from looters. The other blames the new authorities. They wanted to remove reminders of the old ideology, but didn't dare to destroy the images of the gods and the king. For 2,000 years, the slab lay in the ground, even preserving traces of red paint in the folds of the clothing. Now it provides a complete portrait of Assyrian power, and sometimes reminds us of history. They don't erase it, they just bury it deeper, hoping it will be forgotten. Incredible jewelry work on the west coast of Norway in Fylke Vestland. During the excavation of the burial mound, archaeologist Soren Deinhoff found an item in the 1990s that has only been seen about 20 times in all of Scandinavia. A tiny gold pendant from the Roman period, Around 200 AD, it has a diameter of 2 centimeters, weighs a few grams, but the level of craftsmanship is finer than a human hair. In Rome, these were worn as earrings, while in the north they became pendants. It stood out for its size and location atop the ridge, richly filled but not cremated. Analysis of the soil and accompanying finds, such as glass beads and metal belts, confirmed that it was an elite status female burial. The next day, Deinkoff unearthed 2 more silver fibulae. These are brooches or pins that held dresses on the shoulders. Similar pendants are more common in northern Germany and the Danish islands. Only 3 exist in Norway. Scientists suggest that the jewelry arrived through marriage alliances between noble families from southern Scandinavia and the western fjord region. Modern jewelers admit that it is possible to replicate the work, but it would require years of training and more gold to compensate for the waste. The birds will tell. Kailipanar is a modern village in the province of Sivas, central Anatolia. Underneath it lies Samuha, an important hub of the Hittite state in the Bronze Age, serving both as an administrative center and a sanctuary, where decisions were made not only by the offices, but also through rituals. Here, archaeologists found a small clay tablet with cuneiform writing on both sides and a tiny hole through it, which clearly shows that the object was worn hanging on a cord. The format resembles not a book for shelves, but a working memo for a priest. The text describes ornithomancy, divination by birds, taking into account the flight path, calls, time of appearance, and even their reaction to sacrificial food. For us, this is not the exoticism of the ancients, but a direct look into the mechanism of power, because in the Hittite kingdom such predictions were included in official regulations, influencing wars, dynastic marriages, and treaties with neighbors. In those same layers, a mini-archive was found, dozens of tablets and impressions of the royal seals of Katusili III and Queen Puduhepa, whose connection tightly intertwines divination with bureaucracy and shows how religious practice was integrated into political governance. We see exactly how signs were turned into decisions, where the priest and the scribe are parts of the same machine. An empire without an emperor? In Russian history, there are countries, a gap between the image of Pyotr and how the system actually worked under him. Pyotr travels, fights, builds, reforms. But if you look at the documents, most of the specific decisions did not go through him. They went through Alexander Menshikov. His signature appears on decrees, his name is on orders, his people control construction, supply, mobilization, tax collection, and the work of the army. Formally, he is a favorite, but in fact, he is the executive center of the entire reform. When Pyotr goes abroad, the administration doesn't stop. When he's ill, decisions keep being made. When Pyotr disappears for a month, the country doesn't fall apart. This is only possible in one case, if the system of governance is already separated from the personality of the ruler, and this system is concentrated in the hands of one person. Menshikov is not just an assistant. He controls all the points where power turns into action: money, people, supplies, construction, the army. He is not a symbol. He is a mechanism. The most telling thing happens after Peter's death. At this point, Russia should be in chaos. The air is weak, the elite divided, and reforms unstable. Yet there is no chaos because Menshikov remains. He effectively puts Yekaterina I on the throne, governs the state on her behalf, controls the guard, the Senate, and the finances. The system keeps working as long as he does. And then he is removed, not immediately, not abruptly, but he is removed, exiled, stripped of his titles, erased from power. And right after that, Russia enters a period of instability that lasts for almost 20 years. Changes of rulers, palace coups, elite struggles, the loss of reform momentum. This is no coincidence. This is the moment when elitism disappears and the country is left without leadership. In official history, Menshikov is seen as a corrupt official, a favorite, a random person. But if you look at the consequences, he was the only one who held the system together after Peter's death. And that's exactly why he had to be erased from memory as a figure of power. He couldn't be left as Peter's equal, because otherwise the very idea of the lone reformer collapses. They replace the alphabet. Quipu is a bundle of ropes with knots, a main thread from which dozens of colorful cords hang. For a long time, it was believed that the Incas simply used the knots to count corn and taxes, as if it were an ancient abacus. A team of linguist programmers uploaded 21 complete quipus from a museum in Peru into it to analyze. The algorithm looked at the color of the rope, how far it hung from the main thread, which knots were tied, and in what order. The machine quickly found repeating combinations like identical words in a long text. It turned out that the same set of knots on a yellow rope appeared next to records about grain storage, while another set on a red rope was linked with lists of warriors. Scientists compared this with colonial Spanish documents and realized that the quipu conveyed meaning much richer than simple counting. For example, a bundle of green rope plus 3 short knots almost always marks a place for storing corn, while red plus a double knot can mean a tax for the army. If the method is confirmed on a large number of samples, quipu will stop being seen as just a knot calculator and will be recognized as a true writing system. Then the Incas will have to be moved from the list of civilizations without letters to the list of peoples who simply chose a different alphabet, a Chinese-style status symbol. This tabletop screen dates back to the late period of Imperial China and was used in the study of a scholar, official, or member of the nobility. It is made of dark green jade, set in a carved wooden stand decorated with lacquer and inlay. The surface of the jade is covered with hieroglyphs applied by hand. Such screens were not used for privacy, but as objects of contemplation. They were placed on or near the writing desk. The texts on the stone could be philosophical sayings, poems, or reminders of duty and self-discipline. Jade in Chinese culture symbolized purity, resilience, and moral strength, qualities essential for an educated person. The creation of such an item required the involvement of several craftsmen, a stone carver, a calligrapher, a lacquerer, and a carpenter. It was a status symbol. What are these pipes? In the mountains of China, on the slopes of Mount Baigong in Qinghai province, there is an object that has fueled ufologists for years, even better than Roswell. Hundreds of rusty metal pipes stick out directly from the rock, some as thin as needles, and others up to 40 centimeters in diameter. Some of them lead toward the Salt Lake about 80 meters away. And the most intriguing part of this story, many of the pipes look as if they were fused into the rock too deeply, too evenly, and too strangely for a place where almost no one lives, except for a few nomads. The initial studies only added fuel to the fire. The composition seemed ordinary enough, with 92% familiar minerals and metals, but the remaining 8% was recorded as an unknown material. And then it started. Alien base, laboratory, space infrastructure. The mountain even got a monument with a flying saucer, because the legend became stronger than common sense. But then something happened that I love most about archaeology. Reality turned out to be not more boring than the myth, just uncomfortably clever. Modern analyses revealed organic plant traces, microstructures resembling annual rings, and the theory is that these are not pipes in the usual sense, but petrified casts of ancient tree roots. Water from a long-vanished lake once carried the roots, and then processes of soil formation and transformation of soil into rock occurred. They were preserved in such a way that today it looks like a man-made object, so there are no alien plumbers. It's just that the planet knows how to create scenery that looks like evidence. Glass that has survived for centuries. In one of the museums in Europe, there is an object that at first glance looks like a designer bowl from a modern glass workshop. Thin strips of colored glass twist into a spiral, forming a dense, even pattern. But this item is about 2,250 years old. It was made during the Hellenistic era, when craftsmen still did not know how to blow glass. That technology appeared later. The bowl was made by hand. The thinnest threads of molten glass were wound onto a mold layer by layer until the vessel acquired the desired shape and pattern. Each thread was laid with millimeter precision. The colored spirals remain bright, the glass is still clear, and the vessel has kept its shape, as if just made by the craftsman. Such items rarely survive to our time. Glass easily breaks, cracks, and crumbles. That's why each such item is a window into the past, into a craft that stood at the intersection of art and technology. The bowl shows that ancient craftsmen were neither simpler nor more primitive than us. They already knew how to work with the material as if they understood its possibilities better than we do. Power that outlived everyone. There is a peculiarity in Chinese chronicles that European historians usually overlook because it doesn't fit the usual idea of monarchy. There, it hardly matters who exactly sits on the throne. The names of emperors change, dynasties fall, capitals burn, but the system of governance continues to function, not always perfectly, but without interruption. This can be seen in the tax registers, the land cadastres, the lists of officials, and the population census. Even when the country is officially in ruins, grain collection, distribution, mobilization, courts, and construction still continue. This wouldn't be possible if power relied on just one person. In imperial China, the emperor's role was almost always symbolic, which is the first thing that stands out about its structure. He approves but does not govern. He issues decrees written by others. He appoints people who are selected by someone else. The real decisions are made by the bureaucracy, which exists separately from the dynasty. This bureaucracy is older than most empires and outlasts them all. The key to this is the examination system, which first appeared during the Han era and was fully established under the Tang and Song. A Chinese official is neither a noble, a favorite, nor a ruler's relative, but someone chosen after years of selection. The exams do not test loyalty to the emperor. They assess knowledge of the system of laws, rituals, procedures, and reporting. An official serves the system, not a dynasty. So when emperors change, most administrations stay. People may change, but systems remain. This is especially clear during catastrophes. In 1644, the Ming dynasty fell. The capital was captured, the emperor was dead, and formally the state ceased to exist. But provincial archives show that tax collection continued. Warehouses still operate. Officials sign documents using the same seals as last year. A few years later, the new Qing dynasty arrives, and it doesn't need to create a new state from scratch. The state already exists, it simply adopts a new symbol. Reading Chinese administrative instructions reveals the emperor is more of an interface than the ultimate authority. The system doesn't wait for decisions from above. It operates according to procedures, and these procedures are more important than any individual. Even during periods when emperors were children, mentally ill, or effectively isolated, the state continued to function. This is recorded not in legends, but in accounting records. Rations were handed out, canals cleaned, grain redistributed, and armies supplied. The most telling example is the late Qing Empire in the 19th century. The emperors hardly controlled the country anymore. Real power was held by officials and regional administrators. They were the ones who decided what to enforce and what to ignore. They were the ones who suppressed uprisings, collected money, and built infrastructure. And when the empire officially ended in 1911, the system did not disappear. The same people continued to govern the provinces, now in the name of the republic. The name changed, but the mechanism remained. This is fundamentally different from Rome, Egypt, and Europe, where the system was tied to a specific person. In China, it was completely separated from the individual, and this makes the Chinese example the purest proof of the scheme. Power can exist without a face. The emperor is not a ruler, but a node in the system through which legitimacy passes. If the node disappears, the system simply connects another one. That is why there are so many dynasties in Chinese history, and so few real breaks in governance. Names change, rituals change, titles change, but the structure remains. And if you look at this without any romanticism, it becomes clear that here we see not an exception, but an advanced form of the same structure that was previously observed in Rome, Egypt, Europe, and Russia. Only in China did they stop hiding it. There, they simply accepted it as the norm. Canadian runes. Northern Ontario rarely provides huge archaeological news, but the hurricane of 2018 brought a sensation. When the wind uprooted a century-old pine tree near the town of Wawa, a granite slab, almost 2 by 1.5 meters in size, was found under the roots. The surface was polished by a glacier, and a neat frame was carved along the edges. Inside are 255 Elder Futhark runes perfectly forming the Lord's Prayer without error. The carving depth is uniform, as if the master wrote in a familiar alphabet. On the right, a longship with 16 figures is engraved, and just below it, there are 14 X-shaped crosses of unknown meaning. Radiocarbon dating doesn't help here, but geochemists determined that the thinnest layer of oxides on the cut surface formed over about 200 years. So, the pendulum dates back to the early 19th century, the era when Swedish and Norwegian Viking settlers were developing the surrounding areas. No, the style of the runes is already late, closer to the ethnographic monuments of Scandinavia, and the Christian prayer hints at a missionary context. The main question is why the slab ended up face down in the middle of the forest. One version is that it was a forest church and a temporary lumberjack camp where the stone served as an altar. Another is that it was a memorial to a fallen crew. 16 people in the boat and 14 crosses nearby may represent the survivors and victims of a Great Lakes shipwreck. Whatever the mystery hides, the inscription became the longest runic prayer found in North America. When blood becomes thin. Naples, Cathedral. 3 times a year, a crowd waits for the same thing. The bishop lifts a silver reliquary with 2 sealed ampules, turns them over, and the dark mass inside usually becomes liquid, right before their eyes. This is the liquefaction of the blood of St. Januarius, San Gennaro, the patron saint of the city. The dates are fixed. September 19th, the feast day, the first Saturday of May, the transfer of the relics, and December 16th in memory of being saved from the eruption of Vesuvius. If the blood does not liquefy, Neapolitans take it as a troubling sign. In the records. Next to the unlucky years are listed plagues, earthquakes, and financial crises. The holy bishop from Benevento was executed around the year 305 in Pozzuoli. According to legend, a Christian woman collected his blood in vessels. In the Middle Ages, the relics ended up in Naples. In the chapel of San Gennaro, 2 ampules are kept, a large one with a brown substance, and a smaller one that is almost empty. They cannot be opened, so direct chemical analysis is impossible. The Church describes the phenomenon but offers no official scientific explanation. Scientists believe that this is thixotropy. Some gels become fluid when shaken or heated, and thicken again when left to stand. Chemists have demonstrated laboratory samples of blood-like mixtures based on iron-containing compounds, iron oxides, and gelatin proteins. With gentle warming by the palms and movement, they transition from a gel to a liquid. There are also down-to-earth explanations: the temperature in the cathedral, the constant turning of the reliquary, and the natural aging of the contents. The composition of the ampules remains a secret. There is no access for analysis, and it is impossible to directly test any hypothesis. Why does this work? For believers, the ritual takes place in front of everyone. The priest lifts the ampules at the altar, tilts them, the dark mass begins to flow down the glass and becomes lighter. The audience can see the process even from the back rows. For Neapolitans, this is not a chemical corpse but a sign of the city's protection. A reasonable compromise looks like this. Scientists propose possible mechanisms, the Church gives it meaning, and tradition maintains the community's trust. Ugh, disgusting dinosaur. Cambodia, Ta Prohm Temple, late 12th century. In one niche, there's a palm-sized bas-relief of a lizard with 4 legs and a row of plates along its back. Tourists immediately called it a stegosaurus because in textbooks, only late Jurassic dinosaurs have such plates. The relief is carved at the same level as many other ornaments, using the same gray sandstone. The wall is covered with a thin biological patina. The thickness of the coating was measured with a laser scanner. It is even, with no clean tracks that would have been left by recent carving. A chemical analysis of the patina showed an age of at least 500 years, meaning the work dates back to the period of the temple's construction, which is what archaeologists pointed out. The plates match in shape and are arranged just like palm leaves, which Ta Prohm's artists often use to frame animal figures. If you mentally remove the leafy border, what remains is an ordinary rhinoceros, a large body, massive legs, and a short tail. This interpretation fits into the iconography of the complex. There are plenty of rhinoceroses in the bas-reliefs of Angkor. Now I'll explain why the dinosaur version appeared. By the early 2000s, the stone's patina had partly worn off, the leaf edges eroded, and the silhouette started to look like plates. The photo spread across forums of paleomyth enthusiasts, and the story grew without source verification. When the panel was cleaned with microabrasive in 2023, remnants of the leaf veins appeared, and small decorative carvings, which are never depicted on the backs of dinosaurs. It's just a normal Khmer rhinoceros, and the plates are simply palm leaf pieces worn by time. One worn-out ornament turned into a dinosaur sensation, even though it's just a faded background. Funerary bread of ancient Egypt. In the foundation deposit of Hatshepsut's tomb, archaeologists discovered bread that had been lying there for about 3,500 years. These items date back to the New Kingdom era and were placed in the foundation as part of the ritual that accompanied the construction of sacred spaces in ancient Egypt. Such offerings included food, vessels, and tools which were sealed into the building at the foundation level, connecting it with the gods and with the fate of the deceased. Bread symbolized provision, order, and continuous existence. It was not meant to be eaten and was not considered a food supply. Its shape and structure were preserved thanks to isolation and the dry climate. Analysis showed coarse grain milling and impurities, which are typical for bread made for ritual purposes. The treasures of the Alans, located on the southern outskirts of the Chechen village of Alkankala, have long been listed in the Archaeological Register, but the excavations of 2025 sharply increased interest. At the bottom of the narrow, carefully stone-lined tomb, a pendant, a thin gold ring with 5 faceted almandine inlays, glimmered, and just to the right lay a glass bowl, the color of melting glacier. The chemical composition confirmed Byzantine or Persian origin. Among the horse's bones, bronze cilia were found, and along the warrior's legs there were scabbards with stylized griffins, typical of Sasanian art. The burial is dated to the late 9th century, a time when Alania controlled the passes between the Black Sea and the Caspian. The extensive inventory indicates this person was likely from the top of society, perhaps representing Doril's rulers. But the jeweler's technique indicates that the pendant was made locally. The gold contains a characteristic admixture of platinum from the Caspian placers, and the granulation is set on an adhesive composition known from Pakhar finds. Taken together, the tomb destroys the old image of nomads as mere intermediaries. Alan society at the end of the millennium appeared more complex. Skilled jewelers, long-distance trade in glass, close ties with Iran and Byzantium, and most importantly, the desire to immortalize status in gold and horse harness. When a face is no longer needed. In the 20th century, something happened that had never happened before. For the first time, power no longer needed a specific person at all. Before that, the mechanism was always tied to a figure: the emperor, the pharaoh, the king, the leader. Even in China, the emperor remained the point of legitimacy, but in the 20th century, that point disappears and governance becomes autonomous. This is evident not from slogans or portraits, but from documents. In 1917, the monarch disappears in Russia, but the state does not disappear. A few months later, a structure appears that outwardly seems new, but in fact uses the old administrative framework. The same provinces, the same archives, the same accounting systems, the same supply routes. The names change, but not the functions. Power ceases to be personal and becomes bureaucratic. The same thing happens in Germany after the defeat in the First World War. The army is destroyed. The deposed emperor has fled, but the ministries continue to function. The financial departments collect taxes. The municipalities keep population records, and the archives are preserved. When a new leader appears in 1933, he doesn't build the system from scratch. He simply gains access to the already existing apparatus, and it is this apparatus that makes everything else possible. Laws, mobilization, industry, camps, war. Without it, no ideology would have worked. In the United States, the process is even more noticeable in the regulations. At the start of the century, a permanent federal administration, departments, agencies, and commissions, independent of presidential changes, was established there. They write instructions, form budgets, and establish procedures that are mandatory for all subsequent governments. The president changes every 4 years, but the lasting bureaucracy actually decides what gets implemented. After World War II, this system became global, and supranational structures appeared, commissions, organizations, agencies, that do not bend, but make decisions. Their employees are not politicians, but they are the ones who write the rules by which countries operate. They are not faces, they are documents, procedures, regulations, standards, and reporting. This is now the power of the process, not just an individual or group. The most telling thing is that after the death or departure of leaders, nothing collapses. Stalin dies, the system keeps working. Churchill leaves, Britain remains Britain. The administration changes in the United States, and the course changes only at the level of rhetoric. Power is no longer tied to a person. It is embedded in the structure. If, in Rome, the mechanism was next to the person, in Egypt it was behind the person, in Europe it outlived the person, in China it did not depend on the person, then, in the 20th century, the person becomes unnecessary. He can be replaced, removed, discredited, destroyed, and the system will continue to function. That is why, in this century, there are so many regime changes and so few real breaks in governance. And here something appears that did not exist before. Responsibility disappears if power is a person. You can overthrow or accuse them. If power is a mechanism, there is no one to accuse. Documents do not bear responsibility, procedures do not repent, instructions do not answer questions. And it is at this moment that history stops being the history of people and becomes the history of structures. The scorpion mace. In Hierakonpolis, a stone mace was found, which is now called the scorpion mace. It is not a weapon in the practical sense, but a ritual object made of limestone, dated to the very end of the pre-dynastic period, around 3200 to 3100 before Common Era. A scene is carved on it that looks like a moment of public authority. A figure of a man in a crown with a hoe in his hands, in front of him rows of people and symbols of subordinate territories. This all occurs before the pharaoh appears in the typical sense. The most unusual part is the merging of roles. The man on the mace is depicted both as a ruler and as a participant in a ritual, as if he is not just governing, but personally opening the earth. This is not a mythological scene and not a god. This is a living person shown at the moment of demonstrating control over space and people. At the same time, there is no name nearby, no title, no explanatory inscription. Power is shown through action, not words. On the same mace, there are scenes of violence and subjugation, but they are presented not as chaos, but as an orderly process. Essentially, what we have before us is one of the earliest examples of political propaganda, carved in stone. The scorpion mace is inconvenient in that it appears earlier than the system that should have produced it. There is a ritual, there is a public scene, there is a demonstration of power, but there is still no state with names and laws. This object doesn't explain who the scorpion is or who he was. It only captures the moment when power already demands an audience. An oak cart not far from Lake Sevan in the Armenian village of Luchashin. Archaeologists found an object that usually doesn't survive for thousands of years, a wooden cart. But it remained so intact that its construction allows us to study Bronze Age transport, not from drawings, but from a real object. The cart is made of oak, with massive wheels and well-preserved axles. Such finds are rare not only in the Caucasus. Wood almost always decays, and most often archaeologists find only metal parts. Here the shape is fully preserved, showing what local nobility carts looked like and how they were assembled. Luchashin is known for its large necropolis. The rich burials included carts, weapons, and jewelry. Judging by the quality of the wood and the neat craftsmanship, the cart that was found also belonged to a person of high status. Most likely, it was part of the burial inventory for the researchers. This discovery shows what transportation was like in the territory of Armenia at that time and confirms that local communities actively used wheeled transport long before large states appeared here. Egyptian faience. Long before the invention of glass and glaze, the Egyptians learned to create a material that combined the properties of stone and ceramics. Egyptian faience was a mixture of crushed quartz, lime, and copper compounds. During firing, a shiny bright blue crust formed on the surface as a result of copper oxidation under controlled firing conditions. By changing the composition of the mixture and the oxygen pressure in the kiln, craftsmen achieved different shades from turquoise to blue. Faience was used to create amulets, figurines, vessels, and jewelry. Its symbolic meaning was associated with eternal life and the sun reflected in the waters of the Nile. Modern chemists confirm that ancient craftsmen possessed techniques similar to those used in fine ceramics and enamel technologies. Restored samples of Egyptian faience show the same optical properties as modern architectural coatings with metallic pigments. Research on this material is now used in creating durable decorative coatings and design solutions that replicate the self-illumination effect of ancient faience. A man in a fox skin, Ulujak, Huyuk, Western Anatolia, 9 senkyms of clay and a very specific image. The man is not naked. A fox cloak with a turned-out collar and hanging strips of fur lies on his shoulders. The modeling is smooth, firing clean, and edges refined, clearly the work of a confident local workshop. Why the fox specifically is clear. Without mysticism in Anatolian stories, it means warmth, hunting, and the right to lead. On the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, the fox. The hides cover the figure's lower parts among centuries-old monuments and distances, but the meaning remains. Clothing signifies role. Here, status is read not by the body, but by what is draped over the shoulders. The figurine is domestic. Its base is trimmed, which means it stood on a stand. By the small chips, you can see it was picked up and moved. It lived in the interior, not buried in the ground for centuries. For Ulucak, traces of ochre on such items are typical. If the paint is confirmed here as well, the cloak could have been highlighted with color, a warning at the entrance. In the ancient port of Olympos, on the southern coast of Turkey, in Antalya province, archaeologists have uncovered a mosaic floor of early Christian church number 1, dated to the 5th century AD. A Greek inscription has been preserved on the threshold. Only those who are guided on the path may enter here. The short phrase served as a kind of test of conscience for parishioners, even before they crossed the threshold. The mosaic is made of limestone glass cubes measuring 8/4 of an inch with a pattern of stylized vines and palmettes, a popular motif of the Eastern Roman Empire. The field's corners display the names of the actitars, wealthy townspeople who funded the work, revealing Olympos's social makeup in late antiquity. The presence of sponsors indicates the prosperity of the trading city. Large pithoi, long vessels built into the floor for storing grain and oil, were found beneath the mosaic. This suggests the temple was also used to store food for the community. The city was abandoned in the 12th century, and since then the inscription hasn't been seen. The discovery provides an example of how church architecture combined religious services with practical functions, and the short text at the entrance made the access system clear for believers. The Blood Falls of Antarctica, this continent of records, is also home to one of the strangest sights, a crimson stream flowing from the Taylor Glacier. The layer of ice here should be sterile, but the meltwater is colored a deep red. Until recently, scientists blamed iron for the rusty flow. It all seemed clear. However, a 2023 analysis revealed something different. Nanospheres were found in the water, tiny particles smaller than viruses, with an iron core coated in calcium and aluminum. While under the ice, the color isn't visible, but once the water reaches the surface, the shell oxidizes instantly, and the stream becomes liquid blood. The source is an ancient salt lake, sealed off millions of years ago. Salt lowers the freezing point, and at the same time releases heat during crystallization, so the water stays liquid even at 10. In this closed salty system, bacteria live that have been isolated since the time when modern ecosystems had not yet formed on Earth. They feed on sulfur compounds and survive without light or oxygen. This is a scenario for possible life under the ice of Europa or Enceladus. Blood Falls is not a mystery or algae. It's a demonstration of how chemistry, microbes, and geology can work together to create an absolutely alien scene on our own planet. Books bound in human skin. In the 19th century in Europe and the United States, there was a rare but real practice. Books were bound in human skin. Specialists call it anthropodermic bibliophagy. Most often, the skin was taken from executed criminals or patients of anatomical theaters. 1837 Boston, United States of America. The bandit James Allen bequeathed that, after his death, his skin should be removed and used to bind his own memoirs. On the cover, it is written in Latin. This book is made from Allen's skin. 1830, Devon, England. The rat catcher George Codmar poisoned his wife. After his execution, his skin was used to bind a collection of poetry by John Milton. 1882, France. A countess who died of tuberculosis bequeathed her skin to her fan, astronomer Camille Flammarion, to be used for the first copy of his book Terre du Ciel, and now about entire collections. Harvard Library in the United States has at least 3 such bound volumes. One 17th century treatise contains a note about Jones Wright, whose skin was removed on August 4, 1632. The John Hay Library in London confirms the existence of a medical atlas, Vesalius with a brown human cover. The motives were different: a memory of a crime, the rarity of the souvenir, scientific interest. Legally, this was in a gray area. The bodies of criminals were often given to surgical schools, and the remains were used for leather. These bindings are not put on display, but they are not destroyed either. Institutions consider them historical artifacts, showing how far people could go in the search for a unique edition. The strange statues of Ain Ghazal. On the outskirts of Amman, on the hill of Ain Ghazal, archaeologists found something that still sparks debate: plaster statues about 9,000 years old. This is one of the earliest examples of human sculptures in history, but they look as if they were created not by Neolithic people, but by an avant-garde artist. The statues are made of reeds, coated with plaster, and painted. Their eyes are made of bitumen, large, dark, and disproportionate. The faces are flat and elongated, and sometimes two heads are placed on one body. There are figurines of men, women, and even children, but all of them have the same expression, a nearly hypnotic face. Scientists are puzzled by the fact that these statues were not made for display. They were carefully buried, placed in pits, and covered up. This means they were ritual objects, but exactly what kind remains unclear. There are theories that these are images of ancestors, household guardians, or even attempts to recreate the deceased, whose real skulls were buried separately and covered with plaster. The strangest thing is the scale. Entire groups of a dozen figures were found, as if they were created all at once for some single ritual, and each one is unique. Today, these statues are called the most disturbing faces of the Neolithic. The cursed ornaments of the shaman woman. This story is not from ancient times, but it perfectly shows how the same mechanisms of belief work as they did thousands of years ago. In Austria and Germany, for several years in a row, there was a woman who presented herself as a shaman. She convinced wealthy female clients that their jewelry and money were infected with a curse or an evil spirit. Sometimes it wasn't just about misfortune, but about the supposedly predicted death of a loved one. The scheme was simple and frighteningly effective. To lift the curse, the victim had to hand over gold, jewelry, and cash for a cleansing ritual. The amounts reached hundreds of thousands of euros. After the valuables were handed over, the shaman vanished, and later her accomplice told the victim that during the ritual the shaman had fallen into a coma or died. Contact ended there. The investigation established that the scheme had been operating for more than 10 years and affected at least 19 people in Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. The total damage is estimated at millions of euros. During the searches, the police found dozens of kilograms of gold jewelry, gold bars, large amounts of cash, and an entire fleet of luxury cars. The most alarming thing here is not the scale of the scam, but its mechanism. People handed over their valuables not out of greed, not out of naivety, but out of fear. The same feeling of fear that for centuries made people offer sacrifices, bury gold in the ground, and believe that an object could be a bearer of misfortune. A tomb that survived an earthquake. On the territory of the ancient city of Pasargadae, the capital of the Achaemenid Empire, there is a tomb that is traditionally associated with the name Kir Alikov. The structure was built around 530 before Christ and remains one of the most enduring monuments of ancient Iran. For 2,500 years, it has withstood dozens of earthquakes without losing the integrity of its structure. Studies have shown that the architects used principles similar to modern seismic isolation technologies. The foundation of the tomb consists of several layers of limestone. The bottom layer is bonded with a limestone mortar mixed with ash and sand, while the upper blocks are laid on top without rigid fixation between the layers. There is a layer that allowed the structure to slightly slide during underground tremors, which reduced the load and prevented the stone masonry from being destroyed. The upper part of the tomb is made of massive blocks joined together with metal clamps. Despite the simplicity of its shape, the structure is a well-designed engineering system. Modeling conducted by the Islamic Azad University showed that during strong ground vibrations, the upper part is indeed able to shift relative to the base, absorbing the energy of the impacts. There is still no definitive evidence that Cyrus was actually buried in this mausoleum. The tomb was opened and looted back in ancient times, and the epitaph mentioned in the sources has not survived to this day. Despite debates over who is buried here, this structure is among the oldest earthquake-resistant buildings, showing that Achaemenid engineers understood earthquakes better than commonly thought. Nothing like this has ever been found before. Norway, Oslo, the port district of Bjørvika, Skobkov. Archaeologists in the city have discovered nearly 3,000 medieval items, most of which are leather. Shoes of all shapes, low boots, high boots, pairs with perforation and embossing, wrinkles on the bins, and paw prints on the soles. People repaired their shoes until the very end. Leather was valuable. They also found more than 20 fragments of leather bags. Reminder: clothing had no pockets, so people carried items on belts or tied to their clothes, including scabbards for swords and knives. Personal weapons were seen as common accessories, like purses. The most touching thing is more than 40 children's shoes, some as small as a palm, with the same construction and the same patches, just in miniature. Children wore adult clothes and had their belongings cared for. The accumulation was found near the old riverbank dumps by the Alna River. Trash was thrown by the water, and seasonal floods carried everything down to the lowlands, covering it with new silt and preserving it without oxygen. That's why the leather didn't fall apart, but remained in layers until our days. An unprecedented treasure in South Moravia. During work on the outskirts of the village, archaeologists came across a pit, and inside it, a dense bundle of objects stacked in layers. At first, it seemed like a workshop, but the setup suggests it's actually a hidden treasure. On top were bronze bracelets and rings. Below, axes with casting sprues, a couple of chisels, fragments of a sword, and several ingots. At the bottom was a compact bundle made of thin bronze tape, rolled up. Nearby, pieces of a melting crucible and drops of metal were found. Apparently, the owner was a craftsman and was hiding not treasures, but working capital, raw materials, and popular molds. The dating confidently points to the late Bronze Age. This is indicated by the types of ornaments, the casting marks on the axes, and the chemistry of the alloy, tin. Within the usual proportions for the region, there are traces of arsenic and nickel. Several items were clearly used. The edges are worn down, and there are repair rivets. Such hoards were hidden during times of threat or before migration, and sometimes the owners simply never returned. The find is called unprecedented not because of the gold. Key is the set's integrity and lack of later changes. Since the layer is sealed like an envelope, we can trace placement order and reconstruct the owner's logic. Such sets show how the Bronze Age economy worked in practice, what was considered liquid, how they balanced between jewelry and tools, and where the metal routes passed. The oldest brain. In one of the pre-dynastic burials of Egypt, archaeologists discovered something that almost never survives after a person's death: the remains of brain tissue. The skull belonged to a person buried in a simple pit, without embalming and without any treatment of the body. The burial dates back to the end of the 4th millennium before Christ. Preservation was due to conditions, not ritual. Dry sand, heat, and salty soil prevented complete decomposition of soft tissues. Inside the skull, a dense dark mass was found, repeating the shape of the brain lobes. Analysis showed that this was altered but distinguishable nervous tissue, not sediment and not contaminated. It is important that the find is not connected to an elite burial. This is not a priest or a ruler, but an ordinary person. His brain was preserved not because someone wanted it, but because the conditions happened to coincide. This is one of the earliest known cases of human brain preservation, and a rare reminder of how chance sometimes records things. Later, people would try to consciously control the face of ancient power. The west bank of the Nile near Aswan, on the hill of Gebel Kurna, under a layer of rubble. The archaeologists cleared a panel on the rock and saw something that is almost never found in Egypt: a scene with a boat and the figure of a ruler in a palanquin, possibly one of the earliest portraits of a pharaoh from the era of the state's formation. The shape of the boat, with its high ends and knife-like stern, matches the ritual vessels of the late pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods, around 3,200 to 3,000 before Common Era. The detail that researchers debate is the elongated chin and the mark on the head of the seated figure. These are interpreted as a hint at the royal headdress and ritual beard of the first dynasties. Stylistically, the scene is compared to the Narmer mace head. If this parallel is correct, we are looking at a visual symbol of royal power at its very beginning. The value of this find is that it is a rare case in Egypt of a direct, not symbolic, depiction of a ruler. Outside the tomb's interior, on an open rock literally by the road, a boat sails against the current. People pull a rope, and a priest at the stern adjusts the course. Power as movement and as collective labor. We see not a museum statue, but a living substitute, a marginal note in the early state, a native smile. It seems as if someone scratched a funny face on a school desk, but in front of us is a North American petroglyph from the 11th to 17th centuries. Part of the lion complex of 37 figures, the stone is painted with the prints of human and animal paws, and this particular character stands out with horns, feathers, and elongated palms. Scientists argue about what it means: a shaman in a ritual headdress, a totem spirit, or just a self-portrait by the author with a sense of humor. While most surviving scenes depict serious hunting or cosmogony, this one features an almost cartoonish grimace. This means the artist had room for irony and self-expression, not just sacred themes. A book made of leather. In Egypt, restorers are working with one of the oldest Quranic manuscripts, which is over 1,200 years old and weighs almost 80 kilograms. This is neither a scroll nor an ordinary book. It's a giant volume of 1,087 pages each, made from tanned animal leather. The ink has darkened, the text is barely readable, but the letters are handcrafted with amazing precision, each character like a pattern. Scientists believe that this manuscript dates back to the 8th century and was probably created in one of the early Islamic centers, Kufa or Basra. The restorer's work takes years. Each page is cleaned, reinforced, and fixed under a microscope. At the same time, experts note that despite its age, the structure of the parchment is almost intact. This is one of the rare cases when an artifact has been preserved not because of the climate, but because of its sheer size. The enormous weight and density of the pages literally sealed the text from within. For Muslims, this book is not just a monument of faith, but a part of the history of writing. In it, you can see the transition from ancient Arabic script to a more familiar style, as well as how religion turned text into art. When people hear about the homes of ancient Egyptians, most imagine low huts made of mud brick. Excavations in Emet from the northern delta radically changed this picture. Archaeologists uncovered a district from the late period, a whole street of tower houses, 4 to 5 stories high, forming a dense wall along the processional road to the Temple of Wajeh. The height is estimated at 12 to 15 meters, which for the 7th century before Christ is equivalent to a modern 5-story building. The lower levels are packed with grain silos and beer vats. Above are living rooms with narrow chimneys, and higher up are covered terraces where date pits and bronze sisters of the goddess Hathor have been preserved. In the evening, they not only dined here, but also held musical rituals. 5 steps from the doors, a limestone promenade leads to the Temple of Wajet. The slabs are polished so well that even today they reflect the setting sun, and the cult columns stand exactly where the craftsmen of the 7th century before Christ placed them. It turns out to be a real mini Memphis in the province. Dense high-rise buildings, a market, a temple, and a sacred road all in one tight block. 3 repair layers in the masonry show that the towers lasted at least a century and a half, and reliefs with Harpocrates and green faience are still visible on the facades. Ushabti are a sign that religion and daily life literally shared a wall here, and Matt is breaking the old stereotype about single-story Egypt. An artifact from New Orleans, United States of America in the city of New Orleans. A married couple accidentally found a marble slab with a Latin inscription in their backyard. At first, it was thought to be a decorative element, but the text on the stone attracted the interest of scholars. Research showed that the slab is an ancient Roman tombstone about 1,900 years old. Engraved on it is the name Sextus Cangini Vera, a sailor of the imperial fleet who died at the age of 42. The artifact was considered lost since the beginning of World War II. The last record of it dated back to 1939, when the stone was in the National Archaeological Museum of Civitavecchia, which was later destroyed during Allied bombings after the war, and the tombstone's trail was lost. It is believed that the stone was taken out of Italy by American servicemen, and later it ended up in private ownership and was used as a garden ornament. The authenticity of the find was confirmed by specialists from Tulane University and Professor Susanna Luznia. The inscription matched the records in the 1910 catalog of Latin epigraphs. The mention of a ship named after Asclepius, the god of medicine, made it possible to establish that Ver served in the Navy during the heyday of the Roman Empire. The tombstone is currently in the possession of the FBI, and negotiations are underway between American and Italian authorities about returning the artifact to its homeland. United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization representatives stated that this case will serve as an example of the successful return of illegally exported cultural property. Medieval humor. Belgian museums house an unusual ceramic plate from the late 15th century, and it doesn't depict any kings, battles, or saints. It shows a scene where a wife is openly beating her husband, and he's just trying to shield himself with his hands as best he can. The plate was made in Dinant or Malines, centers of ceramic production in the Burgundian Netherlands. Such items were often commissioned not as a formal dinner set, but as a humorous gift, sometimes given at weddings, sometimes as a playful reminder about family life. For researchers, this plate is valuable not only for its design, but also for its context. It shows that people of that time knew how to laugh at themselves and their everyday problems. And judging by how common such themes were, the question of who is the head of the household was already popular 500 years ago. Twice eaten, Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, about 1.8 million years ago, on the bones of early humans. Archaeologists found two different sets of bite marks. The first, wide, jagged gouges with chisel-like edges, were left by a crocodile. The second layer was already on top of the first, narrow punctures and long, shallow scratches, characteristic of a large cat, a leopard, or a similar predator. It turns out that people were first grabbed by a crocodile, and then a land predator got to the remains. Unfortunately, in those times, this was the usual situation in the early savanna. Water attracts both prey and predators. Such findings challenge the idea that humans have always been hunters. 2 million years ago, humans were just one of the elements in the food chain. At one stage of evolution, we were often resources ourselves. A standard trip for water for a human was a chance to get food, and the same chance of being eaten by a predator twice is a good indicator of how dangerous the watering hole area was before humans became top predators. A guide to exorcising a ghost. In the storage rooms of the British Museum, there was a palm-sized clay tablet from Babylon, dated to around 1500 before Christ. Only under certain lighting did the engraved image become visible, a ghost of a man with bound hands being led by a woman holding a rope. On the reverse side, there is a cuneiform text, deciphered by philologist Irving Finkel, which is a detailed guide on how to bind and then banish a restless spirit. The steps are as follows. 2 figurines are made from wax or clay, 1 male, the spirit itself, and 1 female, a companion. In front of the figurines, vessels with beer, bread, and a wooden bowl are placed. The incantation offers the spirit to accept the offering and leave. After the ritual, the figurines are wrapped in cloth and buried at dawn, a signal that a new home has been found for the soul, and it will not return to the living. The text uses the word mashki, the watcher, which refers to a spirit that has not found peace. The tablet adds to our understanding of Babylonian medicine and magic. Treatment used herbs and administrative actions related to the dead. The artifact's main value is its rare combination of illustration and instruction in Mesopotamia. This is a visual manual for a priest exorcist, showing that 3,500 years ago, people were already developing step-by-step protocols for dealing with what we would now call psychological trauma. Darius's gold. During the excavations in Persepolis, workers came across a stone box placed under the foundation of the Apadana Palace. Inside were 2 thin plates, one made of gold, the other of silver. They were placed there during the construction about 2,500 years ago, during the reign of Darius the Great. Both plates feature cuneiform inscriptions in 3 languages. Darius wanted the text to be understood. In different parts of the vast empire, he lists the lands, emphasizes his power, and thanks Ahura Mazda. This is not a decorative item or part of a ritual. It's a statement about who built here, who owned the territory, and under which God the palace stood. The plates have been preserved as if they were just taken out of the workshop. The metal hasn't cracked, and the inscriptions are easily readable. They were deliberately hidden in the foundation, not as a secret, but as a sign for future generations, in case someone ever looks under the stone. Maya blue paint scientists are still studying the technology behind the creation of Maya blue paint, a pigment that retains its color for thousands of years. Analysis of samples from ceramics and frescoes showed that the base is natural indigo combined with the mineral palygorskite, a special clay that forms microscopic channels. When heated, indigo molecules become trapped inside these channels, which makes the paint resistant to moisture, sunlight, and chemical exposure. Archaeologists found this pigment on ritual objects in the walls of temples and on ceramics dating back to the 8th and 9th centuries AD. The paint did not fade even after a century of exposure to the open air. Modern research has shown that a similar structure can be used to create new, long-lasting pigments and protective coatings. The Maya technology became an example of how ancient chemistry defined its era by creating a material that modern industry only achieved after millennia of global development. Almost all of European history is written as if the Vatican is just a succession of popes. One died, another came, the third reformed, the fourth made a mistake. But if you look at the internal documents of the Curia, it becomes clear that the popes almost never governed the church themselves. People whose names are never studied at all, because without them, the popes didn't decide anything. In the 16th century, as Europe divided into Catholics and Protestants, the Pope was still officially the head of the Christian world, but the decisions are not made by him. They are made by the Roman Curia, a permanent body that doesn't change for decades. Popes come and go, but the Curia remains. The Curia decides which reforms are adopted, which wars are supported, which kings are recognized, and who is declared a heretic. The most interesting part begins when the Pope tries to rule on his own. In 1492, Alexander VI Borgia becomes Pope. He is usually described as a monster, a debauchee, a symbol of corruption. But if you look at the documents, he is one of the few popes who actually tried to intervene in governance. And that's exactly why a systematic war was launched against him. Inside the Curia, decisions are blocked, decrees are sabotaged, and legates do not carry out orders. As a result, after his death, the Curia quickly regains control, and the image of Borgia is forever cemented as demonic. Not because of his sins, but because he tried to manage the system directly. The Vatican demonstrates this scheme best in one particular episode, where everything comes to the surface. In 1527, Rome was sacked by the troops of Emperor Charles V. Pope Clement VII was effectively trapped in the Castel Sant'Angelo, and the city was in ruins. The Pope is officially the world's leader, yet he can't even control the street outside his window. At this moment, something begins to work, not the Pope's will, but the chancery, which textbooks rarely describe. Embassies keep receiving instructions, correspondence continues, agreements keep being made, not because the Pope is strong, but because the Curia hasn't stopped. A few years later, the Reformation enters its final phase. The world is changing, and it seems logical to think that everything depends on the personality of the Pope. But if you look at the actual decisions, the creation of congregations, censorship, diplomacy, taxes, the appointment of legates, the same figures keep appearing again and again. Cardinals, secretaries, treasurers, people who can survive a change of pope and maintain the course. The pope may have a certain character, he may be gentle or harsh, but he always has limits, his lifespan and his term of rule. The Curia is not bound by these limits. And from this comes the most unpleasant conclusion, which turns our whole story into the state we've been discussing. Previously, if the second person disappeared, the system would fail. In the Vatican, this doesn't happen because the second person is distributed. It's a network, not just one person. That is exactly why the Vatican survives for centuries and maintains governance where secular states collapse and rebuild. And that is exactly why the Vatican model is so easily exported. Diplomats, chanceries, permanent departments, instructions, secret correspondence, governance through wording and authority. This is not mysticism. This is technology. And when it spreads to Europe, it turns into the form of statehood we are familiar with. The same thing happens with Pope Paul IV in 1555. He tries to break the power of the Curia, dismiss the old cardinals, and rewrite the financial flows. 4 years after his death, a crowd in Rome destroys his statues, and the Curia cancels almost all of his reforms. This is recorded in the protocols. The system simply rolled back. But the most telling case is Pope Sixtus V. He does something that almost no one else has done. He rewrites the entire administrative structure of the Vatican, creates permanent congregations, defines authorities, and deprives individual cardinals of autonomy. And this is what for the first time makes the Pope a real administrator. But right after that, his successors quickly return to the old model, because a Pope who governs is dangerous. By the 17th century, the scheme becomes final. The Pope is a symbol. The Curia is the mechanism. The Pope can speak, bless, proclaim, but not govern. Cardinals outlive 5, 6, even 7 popes in a row. It is they who negotiate, control finances, write instructions, and shape doctrine. And here something happens that completely changes the perception of the story we have just told. Rome, Egypt, France, Russia, and China all had this mechanism close to the ruler, but in the Vatican, it lasted for centuries, became invisible, and spread its model across Europe. Diplomacy, the chancellery, congregations, secret instructions, governance through documents and orders, all of this was first developed not in states but in the church, and later copied by secular authorities. The French bureaucracy, the Austrian administration, the Russian chancellery, the German departments, all of these are direct heirs of the Curia. That is why popes in history seem weak, strange, or secondary. They were not the power. They were the face, like Augustus, like Thutmose, like Napoleon, like Peter. Unlike elsewhere, in the Vatican, the mechanism survived and became a school. And if you put this block at the end, it suddenly becomes clear that all this time we have not been studying exceptions, but stages of learning. History is not a series of rulers. It is the evolution of the way of concealing governance. If you put all this together, it leads to an unpleasant thought. History is made not by those we remember, but by those who are erased. Great rulers come and go, but power remains with those who know how to turn decisions into action. And perhaps the most dangerous person in any system is not the one at the top, but the one whose name is not in the textbooks. I'm very grateful that you watched this video until the end, and I would like you to share it with your friends. Goodbye, everyone, and see you in the next video.